All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to the FPL Script. This is FPL Fran, and we're back with myself and my friend JD. I don't know why I decided to do an intro, sort of like a YouTube video, but fuck. Um,
Let's just roll with that.
yeah, we'll just roll with that. So this is season 3, episode 7. We're looking at game week 3 here of the 24-25 season. Early wildcard is one of the topics on display. But just quickly running through my team here for game week 2. Nothing really to sort of be happy about other than triple captain Haaland. I did go for the Rico Lewis move, and I felt like I was burned twice with decent prospects of a clean sheet but not getting it, and then also an amazing chance and not getting the finish. And that sucked me into some online discussions about whether Salah's a world-class finisher, which was nice as well. But yeah, my team, I had Pedro Porro and Trent with clean sheets. Henderson continues to be pretty dull. Saka, Bruno, Eze, all decent picks, but then Nkunku, the stinker in my team. And then I got João Pedro and Isak to round things up top. And I obviously mentioned the triple captaincy, but happy that I went with João Pedro because the minutes were stellar. And it's also amazing when you go with the player and they scored late in the game because of those minutes specifically. So that was it. That was my week. What about you, JD?
I think, yeah, absolutely. So the triple captaincy has repaid well and truly beyond my expectations. I don't think I'm going to be able to match that
No.
because again, the whole point of not playing my triple captaincy was banking on the mystery chip not being that effective in a double game week, or essentially it being equally effective in a single game week or a double game week. So now it's completely dependent on how the mystery chip pans out. Otherwise, I have to reconsider bench boost. Maybe I bench boost in a single game week, but that does seem to be the weakest play. I think bench boost is probably most optimal if you play it in a double game week, just because of the number of players or the number of fixtures that you gain. But anyway, coming to my team, another red arrow. Despite my captain scoring a hat trick, which seems like an unbelievable achievement. So I joined the likes of Marku in getting a red arrow with my captain scoring a hat trick. Other than that, again, like Fran, I had Henderson. Just nothing to talk about there. Porro, Trent, and Robinson getting a late bonus point, I guess, was the only highlight of my week. And other than that, I had what? Eze, Brighton Diaz, Bruno, Muniz, and Isaac Blanks. So feels exceptionally bad. And I looked back to, so I've kept track of my FPL team since 2019-20, and this is by far the worst start I've ever had. But I'm more than happy with the team. So I haven't spent a free transfer. I don't plan on spending a free transfer. So I will have 3 free transfers next week. I mean, hopefully they will help me get better rank next week, because just saving up transfers when your rank is in the toilet does not seem to be a great plan. But I'll have to just roll with it. So we can move on probably from this shit show.
Yeah, that's fair. So what we wanted to discuss first was just Wildcard 3. This is FPL review. I would say right now it's their sort of default Wildcard 3. This was just on the MILP solver. So yeah, the team is Ederson, Gabriel, Konsa, Robertson. In the bench, your defense is Mosquera and Dunk. In the midfield, you have Palmer, Saka, Salah, Eze, Rogers. And then in the front line, you've got Watkins, Armstrong, and João Pedro on the bench. With a 4.0 dud keeper as well within this team. This is a 99 sort of 0.9 team, I think. So the amount of funds being used here is obviously below the 100 million. If you're a manager who somehow can sort of squeeze that 0.5, I'm sure maybe you can create a somewhat different draft, and obviously based on your parameters. But we just wanted to use this as a launch pad to really just jump into Wildcard 3. I mean, what are your thoughts about it initially?
So the reason we included Wildcard 3 is initially no one thought we needed to talk about this, neither Fran nor I, but it all of a sudden it seemed to pick up pace when we started seeing the unbelievable number of players that are dropping in price. I think we had something like around 90 price drops in the first week and a half, which seems remarkable because usually, and FPL statistics, I think, tweeted this out, that usually the first price change of the season is a price rise. But this season we had, I think, 20 odd price drops to start the season. So from the looks of it, price volatility does seem to be a driving factor for an early wildcard, which is usually the case. If your team is bad, if you have a lot of injuries or players that suddenly don't have great xMins, you can then essentially change up your team. And also now, because you can roll free transfers through a wildcard, if you have saved up free transfers, they will still be there next week. And so wildcard 3 is also sort of beta test. So we have a lot of guinea pigs who will be going through this beta test, and hopefully they can show us that free transfers can indeed be rolled, because if the game mechanics does not allow them, then at least people who are wildcarding later will be will be aware of that fact. So other than that, coming to the actual team, when I first look at the team, I suppose the biggest advantage for, or not the biggest, but one of the big advantages for Wildcard 3 is that you get to sell Eze before his price drop, which seemed inevitable yesterday, but from the looks of it, might or might not happen now. So I'm not so sure if it's going to happen. Him scoring and assisting a goal yesterday in the Carabao Cup, I'm sure has maybe convinced some people not to sell him, or maybe some people have bought him as a result. But I don't think a lot of people pay attention to Carabao Cup results. Firstly, because they don't show up in the FPL app or FPL points. So as far as points are concerned, Eze is still on 4 points, right? So on 4 points. So
Yeah.
it's it's grim when you think about it like that. But I suppose Eze being able to be bought at 6.9. Salah, if you already have him, fine. But if you don't, you would have bought him before yesterday's price rise. So you net another 0.1 there. Rogers, you net another 0.1 there. He's already risen to 5.1. Palmer possibly is going to rise tonight. If not tonight, he's surely going to rise before this deadline. So another 0.1 there. So from the looks of it, you're going to gain, I think, 0.4 to 0.5 straight off the bat and stop the lot. Because if you have people like players like Nkunku, Kwanzaa, do you know of any other players who are close to a price drop that are semi-popular? Because Bruno already dropped in price. So if you haven't already pressed
maybe
the button, then
Odegaard, someone like that. But that's
Odegaard, that's a fair shout actually, because he has been fairly disappointing for people who went for him. Other than that, I don't see. Maybe Raya Gabriel, I thought would rise in price, but they don't seem to be near one, because maybe their ownership has, the delta of their ownership price has not been as much as I thought. But other than that, yeah, it's just, I mean, it's just a good team. My only, not my complaint, but I suppose the only downside I see with this sort of wildcard is that you have to go for a slightly intricate strategy. You cannot go for a more robust plan. This is what I was discussing with some managers who are on Gameweek 3 wildcard, that there are some transfers you have to pre-book because of how the fixtures are. If you go for something like wildcard 6, the Arsenal Man City fixture is out of the way, and I think you can firmly back some teams without looking at, or without having to face their bad fixtures. So just overall, I feel like it's a little intricate, and you have to bank on certain players staying fit or being available. But also, you're saving up free transfers, right? So if you have 3-4 free transfers down the line after a wildcard, seems less daunting than it would in previous seasons, where you could only have up to 2 free transfers.
Yeah, I think what's nice about it is it's like a structural shift, or almost like an admission that you probably preferred the Salah type of draft structure. So in a way, it's like admitting an L if you're a Haaland only person. But obviously the reality is, even if you're on a Salah draft, I think there's some people who might have considered it just for what you mentioned in terms of the price change aspect of things. Like, you could have very well still owned Kwanzaa and Nkunku, Eze, these sorts of players, and Bruno on a Salah only draft. So yeah, the fact that all those players were set to fall, it's a convenient week to sort of move on to players that will rise inevitably. And I think what's nice too is we're starting to see a lot of faith in Palmer, because I mean, look at him now. He's already like the optimal captain for this game week. I don't think we were looking at that in game week 1. So that's sort of a shift there. On top of that, I think the only thing I'll mention is with Wildcard 3, I think the beauty of it, once again, is you jump off of Bruno, and then suddenly you're on like 2 10-point X million assets, and you just have the ability now to just jump onto Foden, jump onto Son, hop on, hop off of these players, and as long as your sort of defense is strong enough, which I think if you look at this draft, it is, right? Because we're already starting to hopefully feel a little bit more comfort in maybe Liverpool being a potentially better defense this season. Even still, you're holding Gabriel through the tough fixtures because of the rotation that you have in place. You have someone like Ederson as well. So yeah, generally like this sort of draft structure is just going for extremely strong players and sort of basically jumping on a team structure before other people are. Whereas I would say for people in my position where we have Haaland, you're still looking at, once again, competing versus the field of people who are on types of drafts like this by going with Haaland for the next 2 weeks as their captains. And so I think there's a lot of value to maybe just staying on, like not going wildcard 3, if you're happy with your team as it is. But clearly this is a very strong team. And it's like, yes, of course, some of these teams are going to jump into Champions League fixtures, and that could muddy the waters with players like Robertson, a couple Aston Villa assets as well, and their minutes. But it's not like there are major issues that I can really spot. So if you really want to downgrade into, let's say, like Watkins to Havertz in a few game weeks' time, that's fine, right? But that's also like a luxury transfer, arguably, if Watkins' minutes hold up. If you're super confident in City already, you might actually already just go Guardiola and sort of ignore Robertson potentially, because you might think that his minutes would be worse. Conversely, it could be Guardiola's minutes that could get worse. So there's a lot of choice that you have now, and it's basically like, an early jump into a certain team structure. But I think I'm pretty set on going for my Game Week 6 wildcard, just because I feel I have a bit of sunk cost with Rico Lewis. But I feel like there's some value there that has yet to be realized. So if I really thought that Rico Lewis was 100% someone who couldn't offer me any value in Game Weeks 3 and 4, and he can't start in the future, I'd probably be on wildcard 3 right now, because on my sort of solves, I think they were pretty close. If I assumed Rico could even start in Game Week 3, and that already tells me, if I can even get let's say Rico Lewis in Game Week 4, then I'm probably actually up, I would say, in terms of eval compared to a theoretical wildcard 3 for me. Whereas if I was wildcarding now, I wouldn't have the same confidence in going for a pick like Rico, because it does feel very risky, right? It's the same sort of logic with someone like Nedeljkovic as well from Aston Villa. Like if you jump on him now and you're, have a wildcard in the future, you don't feel so bad about owning an asset like that who's a bit of a dud, but might actually be a transfer out of Kwanzaa, for example. Those are sort of my thoughts, generally speaking, and I can understand why it's popular.
No, absolutely. Before we move on, just one last thing. I'm glad you brought up the point of the 10.5 million or 10 million midfielder swap, because when I looked at the drafts for Wildcard 3, that is the one thing that stood out to me that I wish I had the luxury to do, because everything else seems okay in the sense that you can swap your 6.5, 7 million midfielders for, let's say, 5.5 million midfielders and get some money back. But the best thing is having those two sub-premium, or should I say like semi-premium players, and Salah, of course. And you can probably go to Holland in 2 moves as well. It should not be that hard if you wanted to later in the future. The other thing is, I realize Ederson and Robertson could be swapped to Alisson and Guardiola, right?
Yeah.
They are the same price point. So I guess there's a lot of flexibility with a draft like that. So if it makes sense for people who are doing it. So hopefully they get the team value they want, because that's the one big driving force, I feel.
Yeah, that's fair. Any other maybe points that you'd like to discuss on wildcard 3, or shall we move on?
So I would just recommend people run the chip timing tool just to see what stands out. If a lot of strategies are clumped together, let's say wildcard 4, 3, 5, 6, whatever, then you can take a call based on which strategy is likely to yield the most team value. But if not, then if one strategy is clear, then I would just advocate people hold on to the wildcard, because there's a lot of things. Sorry, one last thing that we have already mentioned in the last episode, but I'm just going to mention it again, that the transfer deadline window closes on Friday. So for Wildcard 3, that's going to be all the information you need. There's not going to be anything new that comes up except for sales. Any league in the world which still has their transfer window open can still buy players from the Premier League. So we can still have outgoings, but there will not be any more incomings. So I suppose that's a big uncertainty that is removed, but you will have to stay on top of it because it's going to close on Friday at 11 p.m. UK time, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
All right, so I think the sort of new point of discussion, or just a renewed point of discussion, because we've already dealt with this in the last season, was sort of just looking at some of the picks that are more favored either on review or more favored on market odds. And when I say review, I just mean massive data, EV. So the sort of red side picks here, because the delta is actually just showing MD minus MO almost as a percentage of EV, and the red picks are basically market favored. The blue picks are basically review favored. I think just to sort of start the discussion off, Joao Felix probably very market favored, maybe just because he's also a new transfer. I wonder if sometimes there's a bit of juice there, sometimes for players. But you can also see, generally speaking, that there are some Chelsea attackers there, right? So Nkunku is there as well. It might just be a case in, I guess, confidence in Chelsea's attack potentially, and you can kind of see the same theme here with the Wolves team as well, like Hee-Chan, Strand Larson. I don't think it's really anything that comes to Penchik, because I also saw that someone like Cunha was also quite high up in terms of sort of being in the sort of red delta spot. So I think what we can see early doors with a team like Wolves is actually they've been pretty competitive, from the offensive point of view. So if you expect, let's say, the market to be a bit more reactive to that, no surprise that some of the Wolves attackers are here. Any other sort of interesting themes that you've noticed?
So one thing to note is that this is for the next 5 game weeks.
Yeah.
So this covers game weeks 3 to 7. The point was that we wanted to cut it off before an international break, and 7 seemed to be one of those game weeks. So between 3 and 7, one thing, it's funny you mentioned Wolves because Mosquera is also there on the other side.
Yeah.
So it seems like if we were to use just this graph or this graphic as a benchmark, it seems like there's a disparity between how review rates Wolves attack versus how it rates its defense. Because it seems like it is rating the defense much higher than markets are, which makes sense because the odds I've seen on teams to keep clean sheet against Wolves has actually been pretty short in the past couple of weeks. So the 2 games that happened, so makes sense. Other than that, I guess Gibbs White is always a point of contention. I think Gibbs White has always been firmly a review favorite pick.
Yeah.
I don't think he's ever been that favorable when it comes to market odds. I also think Solanke makes sense because there's more uncertainty. I would say markets are reacting to more uncertainty within the team role, within how many minutes he plays, with the penalty share. Review has taken care of all of these, but I think Review has always, again, been a firm favorite when it comes, Solanke has always been a firm favorite when it comes to Review. So it's very difficult to point out particular players, but one player that we definitely spoke about, which is Elemens, who is very interesting in this case, who is rated more by market odds compared to MD, which is Review's massive data. And the reason Fran has speculated, and I agree with Fran, is that it seems to be penalty share, because it all depends on how many minutes Elemens is on the pitch. I still believe he is firmly the main penalty taker. And if he is not on the pitch, then it's just going to be either Watkins or whoever else has taken penalties in training and wants to step up. So McGinn is one of the names that I've seen, but he's only taken 1 penalty for Villa in his career. So I don't know how that is going to pan out. So your thoughts, Fran?
Yeah, I think it's actually, I'm a little bit doubtful that Watkins would ever take a pen now.
I agree with that.
So yeah, I think because probably the gap in logic, I guess, is like how nailed do we think Tielemans is? Because he's definitely going to take penalties, at least for my expectations. But right now it seems like they're quite comfortable in playing the Tielemans and Onana pivot. So I think his minutes look really good so far.
Yes,
and that means obviously conversely you probably actually might rate Watkins a bit less, but arguably also his finishing is so bad he's probably one of the few people who might not get a huge EV boost for being a penalty taker. I suppose.
Onana came off before TLMs, right? In the last game,
Yeah,
I
Tillemans
remember
didn't even
Onana
come off
came off.
actually.
Yeah,
So Tillemans
sorry.
played the whole
Yeah,
game. Yeah.
yeah.
I guess one of the interesting picks that we all love is Rogers, right? Like, look at how highly rated he is. But I suppose these sorts of things are quite sensitive. But I have to say, like, even though I don't really have like a modeling background or I've looked into Rogers extensively, I think the key thing is like you can see a tactical shift here. He's not really sort of playing left wing like he was at the end of last season, and he's very firmly playing like a second striker role. How long that lasts is probably a very key point that I think sometimes maybe something like Review is better at capturing, which I think, you know, we'll talk about someone like Havertz as well, because that has impacts. But yeah, like he's clearly one who's extremely hot here, that I really like. And also, you know, when you're making 50-50 decisions as well, I think it's also nice to kind of see another source of data. Like he's optimal on Review. I would say Rogers, right? We just saw a Wildcard 3 drought with him inside, but you know, the fact that like the market have such confidence in him is nice as an early sign as well. To guess back up your eye test, I suppose.
Also, I just noticed, I had noticed this earlier, but I forgot that Stone and Solanke being on opposite ends makes perfect sense because of the penalty share. Yeah.
What do you think about Haaland, though? I guess, you know, and Havertz even, because I guess Havertz goes back to some of the discussions we've had in the preseason about positioning, and maybe now it seems like, you know, with Jesus getting very limited minutes despite how good he's been in the preseason, you know, it's possible. You can argue that Arsenal haven't been challenged too much, I suppose, within some of the games that they've had so far. So it's been a little bit easier to not play Jesus. But yeah, I mean, clearly Haaland and Havertz feel like outliers, I suppose.
Maybe I would not classify them together, but I get your point. It's essentially teams that are clear of most teams in the Premier League and their leading striker. So in that sense, they are maybe they belong in the same category. But for Havertz, I think it's specifically related to his share in the centre mid position. So because that has not materialized, and a model like Review does have to allot certain percentage to that happening. So I suspect that is the reason why there's a disparity. Because if there were a way for us to change the percentages and we would just assign 100% to center forward, I suppose his EV will come up to what market odds expect him to get. So I completely understand that disparity. With Haaland, I just feel like Review has nerfed City's attack strength based on personnel and specifically Rodri. So maybe once Rodri is back, that will go back up to what market odds expectations are, because from the past couple of seasons, I don't remember there being a lot of disparity between market expectations and Review's expectations when it comes to Haaland's goals. So I expect that to be resolved very quickly, but that's a great shout. Haaland, I would never have expected to be in top 10 on either side when it comes to Review versus market odds disparity. Other than that, I think Chelsea defense seems to be one of those as well, because Cucurella and Colwill are on this list. So seems like Review is rating Chelsea defense much more than market odds are. So that is something to keep an eye out for, I guess. And other than that, yeah, Nkunku not worth talking about because the minutes are not there right now. So, you know, MD or MO, you're not going to have him in your team.
Yeah. And I think Odegaard's just like a classic Review pick because like he has, once again, those like FPL intangibles.
Yep.
Okay, I think that's pretty interesting discussion. We'll keep track of some of these sort of percentages and probably once again, I think when the time is right, we'll probably revisit some of these and just see where things land. It's interesting on Haaland because I think early signs is that I think we all expected City to be maybe a little bit worse, you know, without Rodri and without Foden in the first two games, but they've actually looked really good, I feel. And I could see some team strength models actually sort of with renewed optimism on City, whereas actually the Arsenal performance in the first two games has been pretty flat on attack. So we'll continue to see how things progress. So xMins Corner. Do you want to just get started with sort of what topics you'd like to jump into?
Yes, so a couple of them that we have jotted down. I'm just going to quickly run through the first couple of because I don't think they merit a lot of discussion. So first is Morgan Gibbs White, Murillo and Sells were not in the Nottingham Forest squad against Newcastle. That game has concluded about like 15 minutes ago, and Newcastle won on penalties. Yeah. So that's one update. Because some of their key players are not there, I'm assuming everyone is fine. But something to keep an eye out, because the post-match conference, someone might just ask Nuno what happened. The second is Darwin's ban. So Darwin has been banned for 5 international games because of what happened in the quarterfinal between Colombia and Uruguay. So he will not go away for the international break, or he might, and just I don't know if he's allowed to train or how the ban is being enforced. But he will certainly not play the games, and that means that, and Jota is certainly going away with Portugal, I assume.
Yeah.
So that means that, and Luis Diaz as well, which I think is the larger issue more than Jota perhaps, because the South American games are always more taxing for their players. So seems like Darwin might be shoe in for Game Week 4, but it's not about people picking Darwin. It's about people that already own Jota or Luis Diaz, because they can easily be replaced by Gakpo and Darwin. Although Gakpo will also be on international duty, so who knows? Maybe Chiesa, who is slightly out of favor right now based on what happened in Euro 2024. But I'm going to discount their whole tournament because of how badly they played. So, any thoughts on that one?
No, I think we covered it well.
Okay. Yeah. So moving on to the next one is Watkins. So Watkins has been subbed earlier than maybe people expected, but I think it's pretty much in line with him coming back from a pretty busy World Cup, Euros, even though he played limited minutes. So what are your expectations going forward with his minutes?
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably leaning to less of him being a 90-minute player, so maybe like somewhere between 80 and 85. I think starting with 85 feels like a nice conservative spot, but the reality is they're playing in a very competitive league in Champions League. So yeah, for him to actually play 85 minutes is probably quite demanding for him as well. So yeah, something to seriously look at.
Fair enough. So the only reason we brought that up is because Villa's fixtures are going to turn, or they have turned already. So a lot of people, especially on the wildcard, will be trying to fit Watkins instead of someone like Isaac. So just something to keep an eye on. The next one is Villa defense. So Nedeljkovic, I apologize if that's not how you pronounce it. And the other one is Lutserel Gertruida. So the whole reason I said his name out, his full name out, is because we just loved his first name when we found out. So it's still not done. I mean, I don't think anyone has reported on Gertruida to Villa happening. But as we already stated, there's still Friday to come, which is when the window closes. So is it just a case of waiting till Friday, and then if the Gertruida transfer does not happen, you go for Nedeljkovic? Or can we just buy him even with that transfer happening?
Yeah, I think you just kind of have to wait Friday. I know there's a bit of a sticky spot for people who own Kwanzaa, because he might drop and you're looking for a move potentially with nothing in the bank. I think it's too risky, right? Like you don't really want to move into a dud of a 4.0. And he won't be a dud, to be fair, even if I guess Gertruida signs, but it's, yeah, like you don't want to be wasting a transfer on a 4.0 pick ever. And this is the one time where it might actually work out really well. So you might as well either tank the price drop or actually get the information, which allows for the transfer to actually be a good one, to override that anyways. So yeah, in my opinion, either you make 2 free transfers and you don't dip into the 4.0s at all, or you have to wait for the information.
That makes sense. I think you also don't want to waste a Villa spot right now based on the number of viable players that they have. So completely agree with Fran there. The other consideration for Kwanzaa, I was thinking, so I know there's a lot of uncertainty with how players are locked in terms of price drop or price rise.
Yeah.
So because he went from, I think, yellow flag to not being flagged, has he been locked? So I
don't think so. No, he doesn't look locked.
Because I think he was close to minus 100% yesterday, and he did not.
And he is once again. So I think we'll find out tonight if he's like hidden locked. Because on Hub you can kind of find out when people are locked. So Slanky right now is locked, but then Kwanzaa right now seems like he's unlocked. So we'll see what happens tonight. And there's been a couple of things like that have been teasing that sort of territory, right? Because I've seen that Lewis has been set to rise for the last 3 days, but he hasn't. Whereas Kwanzaa has been set to fall for the last 2 evenings, and he hasn't. So we'll see what happens tonight with Kwanzaa and even potentially Eze, right, who's straddled over the last 2 days. And part of that, I think, is just because if you're like straddling, the precipice of like dropping and or staying the same, it might just be also some of the wild cards that algorithms cannot fully account for, right? These like price accuracy algorithms are not 100% accurate. I think they're at best like 98, 97% accurate. So yeah, I mean, if anyone straddles, I guess, that territory, then you might not see it. But the key thing is these falls and these rises will probably happen before the deadline. So if you can act on it. But then if you have to wait until Friday for press conference news and you get information there, then that's also a huge, I guess, EV boost as well.
One thing I would add is that I was comparing Kwanzaa's situation to Solanke's.
Yeah.
But Solanke was price locked on Hub from day one, but he wasn't on statistics. So he kept showing up in FPL statistics as minus
statistics,
100.
I think doesn't sort of mention when people are locked at all.
I think they do, but you're right. They don't mention it explicitly. They just show whatever status FPL shows, which is hardly an indication. It just says whatever. Like it's loaned out. I think there's one symbol for injured. It's I. Then there's loaned out or something. There's L. There's like 3 or 4 alphabets for different statuses. So you're right. It's quite uncertain when it comes to FPL statistics. So just want to keep an eye out on, because if Kwanzaa owners don't want to wildcard and want to make a transfer, then I guess, like Fran said, you either make 2 free transfers or you have to risk someone like Nedeljkovic. So yeah, I'm glad we spoke about price changes, by the way, because that was also quite important. The next one is Mbumo penalty share. So Tony has been linked with a move away to Saudi. It still hasn't happened yet. It's been on the cards for so long. There's a report. I saw a clip where a reporter was asking Thomas Frank that will Tony come back into the team if he stays? And he said, of course he will. He's a great player, so he will come back. And then the next question he asked was, are you sick of answering the same question again and again? He said, yeah, a little bit. So I suppose we're not going to get any more new information. I suppose the only new information we will get is if he transfers to the Saudi League or to Chelsea or to Manchester United, which I don't think is going to happen, especially United. I think with Chelsea, anything is possible. With United, I suppose we are done with our share of strikers who don't shoot. So, thoughts on Mbumo's penalty share and how you are reviewing, like managing his EV on review?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, right? Because obviously you can't change his pen share. But I think that the interesting thing is whether you consider going for the double up of Mbeumo Eze, or if you're one of those managers who's already considered like, on a wildcard 3, for example, just going Eze instead, or just going Mbeumo instead. And I think it's quite a tricky spot for both, really. I think on review, as far as I can recall, he's got around 50% pen share because like rolling after game week 2 game week 4 because there's the issue where, let's say, if Tony really doesn't leave, you're going to actually miss out on a lot of hidden EV, I think. But it's also not that significant. I think we've mentioned on the pod how you can back calculate an implied penalty share, or like an EV. And I think you can apply that a little bit to Mbeumo just via a small xMins adjustment. I feel like his xMins are already low in default, so you might have to raise that up a bit. But it's a tricky situation where I think he's already so optimal as things stand. The question is just whether you're going to suddenly change your whole team around it, right? So some people now have to double up Mbeumo Eze. Some people only have one of Eze or Mbeumo, and your determination on, let's say, Tony's availability might actually determine whether you're, pro Mbeumo in your draft, pro Eze in your draft, things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the opportunity, unfortunately, to double up Mbeumo Eze. I wish I could. But I think I'd definitely seek to do so. I think even on maybe a Game Week 6 wildcard, actually could be a possibility, I think, for me to go there.
Completely agree there. So the Southampton fixture is prime for someone like Mbumo with
Yeah.
Tony not playing that game, I'm assuming. Although the situation will probably resolve again. No one knows for sure when the Saudi window closes. So we don't know if Tony's transfer to the Saudi league can happen after August 31st, but or 30th rather. So it's still there's still some unknowns there. But assuming that the Chelsea move is quite quite low in probability. So we can just not consider Tony to be a part of the team this weekend. So Mbumo seems to be the perfect pick for this week on Wildcard. It's just the next two fixtures in game weeks 4 and 5 are pretty bad. So if you want, so for people like Fran who is wildcarding in game week 6, and even I am also thinking about that. So if I were to wildcard in 6, then I will definitely go for Mbumo. If I were to wildcard in 8, I'll still I think use a free transfer and go for Mbumo in 6, because by that time we will definitely know if Tony is going to stay. If he stays, perfect. I don't need to move for Mbumo, but if he leaves, I think Mbumo is back to being that asset that all of us wanted to own and owned prior to his injury last season.
Yeah, fair points.
I think we had one last one, which was Palace attack, because Nketiah to Palace seems to be happening. So, and Edward seems to be leaving. So there's a mixture of players where Nketiah, Edward, if he leaves, will not be playing, obviously. Kamada, Sar, and Eze. Now we know that Eze is locked for close to 90 minutes every single game. So it's just a question of which other players are going to play every single week. Now, I'm being honest. I didn't think Sar was going to get like almost next to no minutes. I thought he would have definitely gotten more minutes. So that has been a little surprising. I didn't expect him to start, obviously, because they had a lot of established players. But with Mateta being back so quickly and starting every single game since game week 1, even the Carabao Cup game that they played yesterday, I just don't know how to judge the minutes of someone like Kamada or even Nketiah who's coming in. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think my thoughts are you'll probably see a knock-on impact on Mateta's minutes, but not to a severe degree. But it's very clear, I think, even when Kamada starts most games, that he comes off very, very early. So I kind of see Nketiah as someone who's probably going to eat into both of their minutes, as you said, because as he's nailed. And, once again, it's going to be a question about whether they actually employ a tactical change, because based on what we've seen so far, we've either seen like a dress rehearsal with like Edouard, Mateta, and I guess as in behind, or I mean, technically that was Edouard on the wing, but like, let's be honest, that's not really a thing.
Exactly.
So yeah, like I think Nketiah is obviously a very capable body, but you're already seeing with someone like Sar that it's not like he'll be immediately thrown in there. So I don't think it's going to have huge impacts on how I view Crystal Palace. Maybe just I just think that they're slightly better now that they have a good replacement for Edouard. But yeah, I think it's a slight positive really for SA owners, if anything, but just very minimal impact overall. And maybe if you're a Mateta owner, I'd still be pretty confident that he plays and starts most games. It feels like, yeah, at least for starters, I think Nketiah will probably sort of compete with Kamada for minutes potentially, or at least compete for 15-20 minutes of Mateta, and that could become a little bit growing over the course of the season. But then you also have to think, who's subbing on for Kamada? Is it always Sar? Because right now I'm not even sure tactically if Sar is the sort of player that they wanted, because I don't really see him as someone who can sort of operate too well inside, and I see him a bit more as an out and out winger. So it's a bit weird. I wonder if they will change their tactical structure to sort of allow him to be incorporated, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's only one more point for Crystal Palace, which is most like the key parts of the defense are being sold or have been sold. So Joachim Anderson has already gone to Fulham, and Mark Gay to Newcastle seems to be back on the cards. Like we said, I'm glad we caveated when we said it was off, because just like Pascal Gross, it's now back on all of a sudden. So
although you'll find that out before the deadline, and it seems like they're trying to buy Lacroix. I don't know. So that's one defender back in the team, but I think they also suffered an injury last night in defense.
I was
right?
going to
So,
say
yeah,
the replacement, the Joachim Anderson replacement has been injured. I'm sorry, I'm
yeah, I think
spacing
it's
on his
Chadi
name.
Riyadh. It's yeah,
Yeah, that's the one.
I
So
yeah,
just
it is a
it's
crisis right
just
now. To be
worse
fair,
news. Yeah, worse news for Henderson owners and Munoz owners. But again, at least Munoz always has the attacking avenue available to him. I just feel like I'm not foreseeing any Crystal Palace clean sheets for Dean Henderson anytime soon, because there's just a lot of uncertainty. That's the only thing. I'm not saying that they are a bad team all of a sudden. It's just that this players need more time to gel, and the fixtures are not kind. So, because Chelsea away is definitely not a fixture where, no matter how chaotic
no, yeah,
Chelsea is right now,
that's a glacial
yeah,
loss right there.
yeah, exactly. So no hopes there, but just had to mention it because for people trying to buy someone like Munoz or someone like Dean Henderson, just yeah, not gonna happen.
Yeah, I think. Would you like to also just discuss briefly, maybe? Trying to think about. No, I think actually we've covered most of the xMins. So shall we jump into captaincy then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Captaincy is interesting this week because I think things have shifted around quite a fair bit, and actually all these captains are absurdly close. So I really feel like you should just go with your personal judgment. Like there is absolutely no reason to go by this list whatsoever. Just take your own judgment and pick the player that you want, because it's Palmer, Haaland, and Saka. Palmer has Crystal Palace at home. Haaland has West Ham away. Saka has Brighton at home. So yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on it. I'd probably definitely go Palmer if I owned him. But I'm a Haaland owner, and I think he's still the one that I'd like to go with, because I feel like for the people that I feel like I'm competing versus, which are Salah owners who might have Saka, I'd like to go against that with Haaland, and that's all.
Yeah. Just to compare this situation to a BTEC situation of this kind from last season, Solanke versus Forest, Watkins versus Sheffield United, and Palmer versus, I forgot who he was playing against. But we had these three options. They were absurdly close. I remember you went for Palmer.
Yeah.
I went for Solanke, and Watkins scored 19 points. So even though Palmer scored 10, so I don't think Fran was that unhappy as compared to someone like myself when Solanke scored 2 points. So just reminded me of that. It is absurdly close, like you said. I would also captain Palmer if I owned, but I also own Dean Henderson, so I would like for the goals conceded to be kept to a minimum.
That's a good point.
So, yeah, might as well captain Haaland. So I think I'm firmly captaining Haaland. It is switching between Haaland and Saka. Last I checked, Saka was slightly ahead. Now Haaland is back to being slightly ahead. So it's very close. And I think Saka is also a pretty good captain this week.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And to be fair, also, like if you look at, once again, we already discussed market odds as well. So if you wanted to maybe like inject a little bit of that into your sort of thinking, I guess Haaland would be quite a clear captain there as well. So that's just a key point to raise. All right, let's just jump into some chat questions now. So first of all, shout out to Elise, who's watching from USA at 2 p.m. Appreciate it. Probably 3 p.m. or close now. Luther, I think we did discuss Wildcard 3 just after our Gameweek review. Some discussion about sort of,
and also just Luther, we don't bully Wildcard 3 players. They've already suffered enough, I think.
Right. It's true.
You could be saying that from my lofty ranks of 3.54 million, right?
Yeah. And then Sihan, nice to see you around. Yeah, some more Wildcard 3 bullying that I missed. Nice to see Chai as well in the chat. Some mentions about grass and analytics. I think definitely a mix of both is always healthy.
Connor's in the chat as well.
Okay, yeah. Newcastle straight to the next round. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think Isak actually scored a penalty, right? Which is a nice little confidence boost to him keeping penalties, because he missed his last official one. So yeah. C Hunt says so. No Lewis. Is that on just Wildcard 3? I suppose was that. Do you think the point was?
Sorry, about whom?
C Hunt says no Lewis. He says he's possibly over Mystic. I think it's because he's considering Wildcard 3 Lewis. I mean, we went on defaults, right? Which his defaults in review would never be good. but also you just never know how long he can last, I suppose.
I would not, especially with the uh, I just realized something. Even though you cannot technically dead end now because you can roll over free transfers, there could be a time where, like you said, you can punt on someone like Nedeljkovic and then correct that error.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be as catastrophic, I feel. Okay, fine, you lost that free transfer because you could have rolled it, but it's not as bad as I thought initially because it's still, you're able to correct that mistake fully, and then you're still rolling with a couple of free transfers. So I would not, and I think so. If you listen to Fran's reasoning as well for wildcard, not going for wildcard 3, I think that makes sense, right?
Yeah, but it's close. Once again, like, I mean, my team is on the precipice where if there's an injury that hasn't been diagnosed so far, or if we find out any late news, like I might just be forced to do it because I don't see any reason why I'd like to field out a much worse team. Although for this week, I feel like if I do think that Rico starts, I've got Pedro Porro as a sub option, and it's one of the few weeks where I feel like that's an actual decent one, I suppose, even though it is still Newcastle away. And then there's also the points to discuss as well, where I mean, if you wildcard on 3 and you have one of the issues, is it very reminiscent of like the Kwanzaa situation again, where maybe you've already picked a lot of players in your team that you're comfortable with, that can cover sort of Lewis, even if he becomes a bit of a dull option. But you still have to deal with that, right? And as you said as well, one of the things about Wildcard 3 is that you kind of are pre-booking some transfers. I suppose you can go on the flip side and you can definitely, let's say, go for triple Arsenal now as it stands. Like you can go for Havertz and you can just ignore the transfer down to Havertz. Let's say if you were to start with someone like Isak instead. And that way, that's sort of your evaluation of your free transfers being high, and maybe you want to book transfers much later down the line instead, like around game week 8 or 7, when City have, once again, another nice little swing of fixtures that's quite convenient for people. So it really comes down to sort of your judgments and if you can sort of accommodate for it. But I'd probably not have Lewis on my wildcard 3.
Completely agree.
What do you think about Bowen as a pick? I think someone mentioned it in the chat. The reality is the next fixture is awful, right? The next fixture is City. Yeah. But then, I mean, generally, I guess after that, there is an argument to be had about whether you like Bowen. I think one of the classical issues with Bowen is, he's an absurdly good open play attacker. His underlying stats for a non-penalty taker are ridiculous. And also like someone who doesn't really take many set pieces, right? So, but then I think
he does take corners, right? Because
some corners, I think he does.
Hardly on the pitch right now.
Oh, that's a good point. Sorry, I didn't. But I guess the tricky thing is how you evaluate some of the players around him in price point, which would be, once again, going back to players like Mbumo and going back to players like Eze. So I feel like you can definitely, I might even prefer someone like Bowen over someone like Gordon at the 7.5 price point, maybe even someone like Luis Diaz potentially. So I think it really just comes down to how many of those spots you have within your team at any one point in time. And it might be the case that actually Bowen is like, let's say after the City game, someone that you definitely consider to have in your team, because he's just a very stable, solid pick. And who knows, we might continue to appreciate, I guess, West Ham a bit more under Lopetegui than we did under Moyes.
And no European fixtures, right?
True.
So that's
really good
that's
minutes, basically guaranteed always. Yes. Yeah.
No, I agree with you, and it always happens. I think in the past couple of seasons, especially, that Bowen gets ignored because there are a lot of players around his price point or even lower than his price, so he gets lost in the sauce sometimes when it comes to MD. But that's a really good point. His npxG has always been above par, so if you have the chance, why not? The team strength has massively improved, so there's no doubt that his output should improve. And if you have the money, then so the only thing is Paqueta is playing more minutes than I thought he would, because I had completely written him off based on what was going to, like, what I was expecting to happen in terms of all the gambling stuff. But just like Tony, there's no sight of that happening right now. So maybe Paqueta is also a consideration, but again, it's just very risky, I would say, with Paqueta. With Bowen, it's much more secure.
Well, one thing this season, though, is that Bowen might also just not be a 90-minute player, because I think he's already been subbed off or maybe it was just the first game of the season, but
First game,
probably just because of European. But yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that's something to also keep a track of, because yeah, if he just remains a 90-minute player, then yeah, I mean, like, there's nothing to be said. He's just an amazing pick.
But Somerville played today, right? He started today, so that just makes me feel like there could be some
Exactly.
rotation. And you're right, maybe he does not play 90 minutes. So that's one player where you have the luxury of waiting for a couple of game weeks, gauging his xMins, and then making a decision based on that.
Yeah, because I guess right now it's sort of like they're going to play Socek and Paqueta almost in the middle, and then you kind of have Somerville and Kudus sort of duking it out. But yeah, there's always going to be like Rashford's a great example last week, where you look at the first game week and suddenly you think he's a 90-minute player if you want to overstep that far. But then yeah, the next week he just becomes subbed off, and I'd say obviously Rashford is much less important to a team like United than, let's say, Bowen is to West Ham. So that's obviously not a fair point, but it's just a point to reference.
No, but that's a good point, because just to come back to that point, I also thought that Rashford's minutes would be more based on how he was used in Game Week 1.
True.
But Game Week 2, all of his old traits that we saw from last season that you had also mentioned, I listened back to a segment of our pod where you were talking about Rashford not being up to the mark last season and hence not getting enough xMins or minutes rather. So the game against Brighton was too much, and I think Ten Hag just got fed up at some point and decided to make that sub. So that was just a reminder to myself that him playing a good game does not change anything in the long term. If he continues to be this erratic player that now we've come to know for the past couple of seasons, this is going to continue to happen. So even with Garnacho, I think Garnacho is probably the best pick from all the United wingers, but there could be a game where he's just rested, because the new Europa League format also has 8 games. I will correct myself in the YouTube comments if I'm wrong, but I think we also have 8 games instead of 6. So if that is the case, then there's going to be even more game time, and I don't see how any of our players are nailed. So Luther says, thoughts on triple Villa defense on Wildcard 3. I'm just going to say no.
Trolling. That's trolling.
That's trolling.
Someone said thinking of going from. Actually, did I miss something?
Oh, Luis says Eze to Mbumo done. Yeah, fair.
Okay, I think that's fine.
Probably have suggested holding, but if you wanted to not suffer the price drop, it makes sense. Tonali back for Newcastle. That's actually huge for them. We already discussed this, right? That Tonali has taken set pieces and will probably take them away from maybe someone like Gordon.
I saw Lewis Hall actually take a corner today as well, over Gordon. So we're starting to see.
Was on the pitch, right? Because Trippier was captain today.
Yeah, so we're starting to see interesting things. But it also just once again means that if the EV is shared, then we kind of view all the assets like universally worse.
Yes. So can I ask the game straight? What was the game like? Were they trying to quickly take a corner and he was the
potentially, I think so. But
okay.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. That does add to the uncertainty. I was just trying to understand what the situation.
No, that's a good point. Semenyo, good. Yep. Congrats, Thunder Elephant. That's actually a pick that we really liked on the pod. Lewis Evans says, thinking of going from Garnacho and Kwanzaa to Robinson to Smith Rowe. I don't mind it too much, to be honest, but I think one of the things with Fulham is that, if you're looking at the wider scope of the run of games that they have, of course, the next 4 fixtures are really good for Fulham. But they do definitely tail off. So I feel like sometimes when you've missed the boat, I guess, with Leicester at home, you might want to consider not being that heavily invested into Fulham, but totally fine as well to still make those moves. Let's see. Thunder Elephant says X clinical more impactful than XG. I mean, that's an interesting point, because I mean, look, obviously being clinical is important, right? But the thing is also, like, you need to be able to tell how consistently clinical someone is. And you can't really predict that ahead of time. Like, obviously we've talked about finishing on the podcast before. You have players like Son and Foden who are just proven positive finishers. But the reality is they can still have bad days, just like someone who is very average can have a very good day, and that's sort of just the nature of games of chance, I suppose, and that being applied to football.
Saleh's question is good actually. Does Mbumo's low ownership surprise you? No, potentially, because
I think
we
it's
had a lot
fixture
of players.
related, I would say at the
Yeah,
start. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
Um,
think it's solely related to fixtures,
but
and we
I think
discussed this
to
so many
respond
times.
to that, it's only going to go higher. So I think for
It
people
is.
who actually start with Mbumo, especially for example, like we know someone like Dan who went on a wild card 4. Brentford technically on a 3 game week perspective from game week 1 had 2 out of 3 good fixtures. So there's always going to be opportunities for people to do that, but that's also a very early wild card, and I think still earlier than most people had planned for. So I can kind of understand when people look at the overall scope of the games, like even if you look at the first 6, like it is pretty poor for Brentford, right? It's like 3 bad games, 3 good games, and that's not really good enough, even if Mbumo is a game-breaking asset sometimes. Particularly because we weren't sure that he was going to be a game breaker, I think, via penalties and things like that.
Yep.
Nice to see Flapjack. Question in the chat in terms of, is it better to take a -8 than wildcard as long as you have Palmer and Holland as top premiums? I mean, well, it comes back down to what you think, right? Because I think to respond to your question, Saka's an amazing Game Week 6 captain. If you look at Game Week 6, that's one of those weeks where it's actually very hard to see anyone who's actually as good as a captain. But then, of course, because you own someone like Palmer, he's always going to be the second best option that week. And with Holland as well, he's very often going to be the second or first best option in every week. So to sort of respond to your question, I think if you're comfortable with going Palmer and Holland for the foreseeable future, I would probably take the -8. If you are of the general mind frame of taking these sort of largely sized hits. But for managers like us, I think, who are probably a little bit more analytics inclined, you would never really take a hit early in the season. Maybe we'd actually take a -4, but it's unlikely for me to sort of shift my whole team around with a -8 this early on, because you're going to get more information. You'll probably have different valuations of players. So unless really you have multiple injuries, multiple players who are not playing football anymore, then that probably screams wildcard to me, because I think, I mean, it's, if you're stepping into -8, -12, it's probably close to a wildcard territory.
Yeah, -8 is just not on the cards, I would say.
Yeah. Elevenify, you want to read out his question?
Elevenify says question: who is a bad manager for wildcarding in 3, and why is it me?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Oh,
I guess there you have it, Elevenify. You answered your question.
Yeah. You answered your own question. Good
got
one.
him.
Good one,
Maybe you should just start a thread on Discord or something. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just an idea.
And make sure you write it. It's already too late in brackets.
Yeah.
So.
And try to call out other managers who actually have better teams in the process. So, let's see. Run the Fly is sort of standing Bowen a lot, which I think is totally fine. Christopher says, could I get some thoughts on a few wildcard things you're thinking about? KDB, Liverpool, fullback, double up, Watkins in, no Holland until 7. I think all the points are super justified. On KDB, I think the only thing I would say about him is I'm not really sure if I find him to be optimal. But once again, if you go back to sort of the graphic that we had earlier in the show, right, where we were discussing this here, like if you're a little bit market odds minded, KDB seems really strong as a pick still. So I guess it depends on how you rate the review EV that KDB has, and also how much you feel like he's going to be available this season, which, he's had a nice preseason, I think, so far. He's been fit. He's played really good minutes. So yeah, if you want to go KDB on the wildcard draft, I wouldn't hate it too much, to be honest. I do feel like he's definitely one of the few players on review where the EV is very clearly very low. Like, look, the gulf here is 13%. That's huge. I don't know if you have any thoughts on KDB, actually, because we didn't actually touch on him during the segment earlier.
So KDB is a weird one, because right now that his minutes are good, which is very rarely the case, especially during peak middle of the season or towards the end of the season.
Yeah, and Champions League coming back soon.
Absolutely. So till Game Week 4, I suppose you had to start with him. That was the only way for you to justify picking him. And then it was a clean break where once Champions League started after Game Week 4, you could look into moving him on. Now that 2 of those games have already gone by, I just don't see. And the best game has already gone by where he scored points like we anticipated he would. I just don't see how you can go for him, because I was thinking about this from a draft perspective. There's a draft league where I've seen KDB is still available because someone discarded him last week. I don't know why. So even then I was thinking, do I go for him? Because I think I should, because whenever you're in a huge draft league, you don't have enough premium players as it is. But overall, I was thinking from an FPL perspective, would I go for him right now? Because Foden is coming back surely. I don't know if that illness was a serious one. I also hope it was just a minor illness. So he'll be back. And Rodri is probably going to be back after the international break. I still don't know because Pep has been oddly silent, right? I haven't seen any updates
I think he said that Rodri was in training but was in like no shape to play. So it's very likely he might even miss Game Week 3. And another point is Gundo's back as well, which is huge.
Gundo's back. Perfect. Yes. So that was the third player I was coming to. So these three players coming back is going to have a huge impact on players that seem to have great minutes right now. Fran pointed to me that Savinho might also be one of those players who is going to suffer. As a result, we see that he's getting great minutes right now, but that might not be the case after the international break. So from only a minutes perspective, I feel like KDB is no longer accessible, but he definitely was in this first part of the season.
That's fair. Yeah, I think we talked about Savinho as well for the person who's asked about Nkunku. I just think it is sort of going from one pretty risky asset to another. And the only thing I'll say about Savinho is that it's not quite like, let's say, a Rico Lewis situation, because I feel like with Rico Lewis, you knew he was 100% going to 90% going to start versus Ipswich. And I think that him versus the next available replacement was absolutely shocking, the gulf between like Rico Lewis and the next best 4.5. Whereas with Savinho, one of the things I'll mention, of course, is if you can stretch to the Mbumos and Eze's world, like they're, in my opinion, far better. Whereas some of the other 6.5 picks, that's probably why you like Savinho, because there just aren't many appetizing ones, and you have to go down to Rodgers to actually find someone interesting, or you go for someone like Bailey, who has, I guess, some set pieces and things like that. Gibbs White is a weird one too, because Gibbs White, you can't even rotate him for the Game Week 4 fixture unless you have 8 attackers. So I feel like a lot of people within analytics have actually gone for him because he's like a 1 week move for them, or that they have cover. But yeah, I think as a direct transfer, if you're actually looking at someone play consistently, like I don't love Savinho as a pick.
No, I completely agree with that.
Captaincy options for Game Week 5 with Arsenal versus Man City. I think it's just you have to move out. I feel like of one of the players that you have. If you've, let's say, got Haaland and Saka, right, you've got to move out. So you've got to move out to Palmer, you've got to move out to Son, you've got to move out to Salah. Because I really feel like that is such a bad week for captaincy.
Yes. I'm just going to give an example from my team. So current solves are indicating that I'm going to make Brighton Diaz and Holland to Salah and Joao Pedro. So that means I will have Salah for Game Week 5. But that is a peak fixture where you don't want to captain a player from that team, any of those teams. So I would highly recommend a transfer. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, specifically to Salah, Son, or Palmer, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I should have mentioned some players.
No, that's fine. Someone says Game Week 3 captain. Yeah, I think we discussed that segment, so you can have a look at that. Tiggy says you've got Mateta based on end of season form and continued form in Olympics. Could work out Game Week 3. I mean, I feel like if you have Mateta in your team, because Game Week 3 is already a little bit of a write-off because it's Chelsea away, I still view him similar to Eze, where I think his minutes are good. Obviously not to the level of Eze. But the fixtures right after the Chelsea game are actually quite good, because I believe it's like Leicester and United, right?
Yes.
So yeah, like I would definitely hold Mateta at least up until those fixtures end. I'm not even discounting, I think, the Everton fixture, which is on Game Week 6. So generally speaking, I think Mateta is actually a hold. And I think that's fine.
Back home games, I don't see why you would get rid of him.
Yeah. And Boomer Watkins captaincy on Game Week 3. Is that what we're asking? I think they're close, but they're not that competitive, I would say.
I would still say Mbumo based on minutes. I just don't trust Watkins' minutes right now.
I think Mbumo was a clear better option in Game Week 3.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, even Isak's a fantastic option if you want to go there, I guess. Tottenham at home. You don't like it?
Yeah. No, just that Newcastle team strength seems to be declining.
I don't even know why though, because even last
have
season,
no
I think
idea.
we ended at a place where we thought the attack was strong. Or
It was.
yeah,
It was. No doubt.
right.
It's not just because I'm seeing the results. Obviously, I've also seen review adjusting some of
Yes.
the EV from Gordon and Isaac. I mean, it was never hot on Gordon to begin with, but even someone like Isaac.
If we
And
go
I
back
mean,
to the MD versus MO thing,
yeah,
Isaac's actually another
yeah.
one of those players who's a little bit more market oriented. Yeah.
I forgot to talk about Isaac, by the way, there. So just a minute on Isaac.
Mm.
So I remember before Game Week 1, all of us were just forcing Isaac into the team. I remember I did not even look at us all.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just got Isaac in my team. That's it.
But he wasn't.
But I always remember that he was a borderline case with
Exactly.
review.
However,
So
close to the deadline, I felt like he wasn't so much of a borderline case.
oh really?
I
Okay,
don't
so
know. Yeah.
there's because in Game Week 1 we did not have access to market odds.
Mm,
So if review was incorporating them behind the scenes,
very
that would
fair.
make sense because markets are always going to be high on someone like Isaac.
Got
So
you.
I just feel like that has come home to roost in a sense because
Yeah.
and this is a little bit of
Well, I mean,
hindsight.
no, I'll go against that because I mean, what about our main man Bruno? However, Bruno
Yeah.
market versus review was literally almost 0%. I will mention.
Yes.
So shout out to Bruno for the first time not featuring on that segment, I suppose.
Yeah, because market should be lower on him. So if we look at someone like Odegaard, right?
Yeah,
Except
exactly.
that Odegaard has Fugazi penalty share compared to someone like Bruno.
That's fair. Okay.
Christopher has a good point actually about Savinho, which is that Brazil is going to play late. So that's another reason why you don't
Oh, perfect.
need
Yeah.
to go for someone
Even
like
more
that.
sort of anti Savinho prop, but
Absolutely.
wildcard question, better to have Trent Alexander-Arnold. Oh, actually, I mean, someone did ask a question about the double fullback piece, right? If I just jump into that, Liverpool double fullback, because I think it's actually more than viable. But then you do have to cough up the 0.5, because what I tend to notice with a lot of the solves is that because they're also sort of 99.x solves, it's more than likely that you don't have the 100 million back to actually afford Trent and Robbo. But I can't see why you wouldn't want to go Trent Robbo if you could. I think it's actually an interesting sort of differential path, I suppose. If you want to also like ignore Arsenal defense in the short term, maybe even ignore a City defender, it could work. And maybe that's because you're just going Raya as your goalkeeper. I actually think that's very sensible. But that's once again, as I said, if you can afford the team that we were sort of looking at. I feel like if you wanted to ignore Watkins, the thing is, if you go for Watkins and if you go for Trent and you go for Robbo, one of the issues that you'll see is that team is extremely thin. So you have to resort to Armstrong, you have to resort to another 4.0. So there's a lot of concessions that you have to make. Or maybe the concession is simply you go for a 4.5 goalkeeper like Flecken, or maybe a goalkeeper rotation at 5.0. But yeah, I think all those options are all plausible, which shows you how that the structure of Salah, Saka, Palmer can be sort of maneuvered around. But it's actually a very stable and strong looking structure, which is what I like about Wildcard 3.
I was just looking at if any players have gone down to 3.9, no luck. So we don't have any players at 3.9 yet. So you can't even compensate for price drops by going for a dead player in your team. So that's...
yeah, I guess there's like, I mean, at 4.4, you've got Mikolenko now, but then do you really want to have an Everton defender? Probably not. There are some cases where it could be interesting, though, for some managers. Thoughts on the defensive? Saliba, Robertson, Hall, Porro this game week? Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky defense, right? Because you've got Hall, who might not start, and you've got Porro, who just doesn't have a great fixture, but he's playable. So I would just play Saliba, Robertson, Porro in that situation. Personally, would like to back Tottenham because I actually just think that they look like a slightly better team right now, but that's... I don't think the EV would be too different for Hull and Porro, which also means that you should just back the asset who actually is guaranteed to play 90 minutes of football. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And I think that's it.
I think that's it. Thank you everyone for all the chat questions. Hope we were able to help you out a little bit. And thank you everyone for joining this episode. If you are listening on podcast, make sure to rate 5 stars. Do all the bits needed to help us grow. And if you're on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and let us know if you have any thoughts on this episode. And if you'd like us to make any improvements, any additions, we can look into that. But have a good rest of your day and good luck in Game Week 3. Bye.